Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Jenna Flanagan. After days of global uproar, President Donald Trump offered reassurance this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend over his alleged remarks that angered much of the nation.
I am the least racist person you have ever interviewed.
The president has denied slamming protections for immigrants from places he allegedly referred to as S-hole countries in the Caribbean and Africa, and then added that he would prefer people from Norway. Despite his denials, the issue of who is and who is not welcome to America now dominates the national conversation. Here in New York, the fight over immigration is boiling over, and one Brooklyn council member has been particularly visible in the fight, Jumaane Williams. The councilman last week was arrested while protesting the detention of immigrant rights activist Ravi Ragber. Yesterday, in a speech marking Martin Luther King Jr. Day, he announced he's forming an exploratory committee for lieutenant governor. Later, he joined hundreds of New Yorkers who descended on Times Square to honor Dr. King by protesting President Trump's recent alleged S-hole comment. Today, Councilman Williams joins us on the program. All right, so Councilman Williams, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me again.
So first, I want to start with the blowback from President Trump's comments. First, what was your reaction when you heard what he allegedly said?
It's always and hopefully forever will be shocking, I guess, but not surprising, if that makes sense. This is who Donald Trump is. This is, I believe, many of the people who are still supporting. This is the type of things they believe. And he hasn't changed from the campaign mode. This is what people elected, so this is what people wanted. But we do have to make a clear, straight line between what he said about Haitians, Africans, and people from El Salvador, and specifically saying he preferred people from Norway, connect that to all of the policies that he's putting forward, including and around immigration and the mass deportation we're seeing of people like Ravi Ragber, like Jean Montalvo, like what's happening on 7/11. There's a clear line between the bigotry that is happening there and the policies.
And that is something that we're going to get to in a little while, the protests about some of those deportations. But I wanted to sort of get your response, because what I was seeing from people who were defending the president were saying, well, I live in a part of the country where there's so much hurt. There's joblessness, hopelessness, homeless people. We need to take care of our own first before we start helping others. What's your take on that sentiment?
Well, I don't know if I disagree wholeheartedly. And the people who were defending immigration are us. They are a part of us. These are people who make America what it is. What people like Donald Trump and people who have been benefiting through the recession, through all the downturns, they have benefited. What they've done a good job is getting people at the bottom, so to speak, who are not benefiting, to fight amongst themselves, to make believe if one person wasn't here, somehow they would succeed, when nothing else could be further from the truth. The way things are navigated, the people who are normally called 1%, they succeed either way, and they've actually making record-breaking amounts of money, while the people you spoke about, and the immigrants, and people in the city, are all suffering. That's the way this thing is designed. And the one thing that the Orange Man, I think, has done some good is got a lot of people who normally didn't speak to each other now talking, and hopefully beginning to realize the common enemies that everybody has.
Okay, because I was going to ask you where you think the national conversation stands, but the fact that there seems to be a growing conversation is a positive thing.
I believe it to be a positive thing. I think there's much more pain than I believe would have had to happen to get here because of people like Trump. But I also want to make sure we point out a lot of these things were happening before Trump. We can't just put everything at his footstep. A lot of these policies people believed, but tried to pretend that they weren't bigoted, that they weren't xenophobic, that they weren't misogynist. And now we just found somebody said, forget that, I'm just going to say what it actually is. And we see people still trying to defend him, while at the same time making the same argument. That's the illogical nature of bigotry to begin with, so that shouldn't be surprising. But this is what, unfortunately, these type of beliefs have been in America since its founding. Thankfully, there have always been people who have pushed back on that and tried to make America what it says it wants to be versus what it actually has been. And that's the ilk that I'm proud to come from.
You were yesterday supporting other Caribbean Americans, Haitians specifically, at a protest for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but also against President Trump's words. So first, tell me about why did you go to that protest?
It's critically important that any time this man, who I personally doesn't believe deserves a modicum of respect, I don't even think he respects the office he holds. But anytime that happens, as much as it's beginning to happen so often, we should never ever allow it to become the norm. We should push back forcefully every single time and make sure people see we're not just going to accept this. Secondly, a large part of my constituency, I'm very proud, are Haitian Americans. This is a community that has been attacked consistently. But he also attacked people from Africa, people from
the
El
entire
Salvador.
continent, yeah.
So everybody of good moral conscience should be pushing back on that. But also, it could have been my parents before they became U.S. citizens. It could have been my brother, who was undocumented for some time. It could have been any one of my constituents. Lastly, it could be any one of us, because they come for some people in the morning. They come for everybody else at night.
When you're out at these protests, I've heard pushback back and forth. Some people say it's really good to have a show of force of a number of people in the streets protesting against something. I've heard other people say, you know, it's really more important to make sure that those same people protesting are going to the polls, even that might be even more important than the show of numbers in the street.
I pride myself being an activist legislator. I'm comfortable passing bills and laws in the halls of City Hall, hopefully somewhere else shortly, but also in the streets protesting. That's very important. And very often the legislators respond to who's in the street. Most of these movements and most of the things that we've talked about in the past, they weren't legislators who did it upon themselves. There were people in the streets who forced it to happen. But I do agree, voting is immensely important. If you're just out in the streets, if you're just making sure, and if you're just making noise, which is critically important, and I'm down with that. But if you're doing that without the commensurate response politically, it could go nowhere.
I want to go a little bit further into another protest that we saw you in recently, and that was for the immigrant rights activist Ravi Ragber. Now, that was a protest where we saw you arrested. You were thrown on the hood of a police car, I believe it was. But at the same time, immigration was saying that this was someone who had exhausted all of his appeals. He had to be deported. Why was it important to show up for him?
We just have to be careful when people are talking about laws and things having been exhausted. We have to talk about what's moral and what is correct. Most of the times when people are fighting social movements, there are laws that are protecting the immoral nature of what people are pushing back against. And what we're saying is these laws are wrong and they have to be changed. And there's no difference here. Again, as I said at the beginning, we have to make a notation of what the bigotry that Trump is saying versus the policies that they put forth. Secondly, we have to make sure we understand that this nation is full of hundreds of thousands of laws, if not more. And no one will say we can enforce every single one, every single hour, everywhere in the country. What we have to do is decide what is best to enforce now for the safety of this nation. And so someone needs to explain to me why the mass deportations, why are we searching 7-Eleven? Why we are deporting Ravi Ragber, who was convicted of a very, very low-level crime and served 2 years in prison, and served 2 years in house arrest, and served 2 years in a detention center, and since then has been a model resident. And if you ever spoke to him, the most humble, peaceful person you ever met, why he and someone, Jean Montalvo, are being deported, we believe it's because they are leaders in the immigration movement. They were co-founders of the New Sanctuary.
We actually did have him on the program to talk about that. But before I let you go,
I just want to make sure. So it's critically important that we connect these. And I don't understand how people can celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King and then question the type of protests that we were pushing back on when it came to Ravi and others.
Okay. We are running out of time, but I do want to ask you, you are forming an exploratory committee to run for lieutenant governor. In layman's terms, what's up with that?
I'm very excited about this exploratory committee. I think the lieutenant governor position hasn't been utilized as effectively as it could be. I view that position as a very powerful position, particularly to push certain policies, to raise people's voice, not just to parrot policies that are being put forth. And I think that's important, and I think that's critical because of where we are right now. I haven't seen that happen. And so I've opened an exploratory committee to see if there's an appetite for the type of politics I bring, to the type of voice I bring, and a very viable vehicle to get there.
Is there also a path to get you on the ticket? Because right now, Governor Cuomo has a lieutenant governor, and he seems to be quite happy with Kathy Hochul.
Sure, and I welcome the governor's endorsement if you'd like. But
you're first on Metro Focus.
But we have this exploratory committee. I will be running for the nomination in the Democratic Party. Right now, I am not part of a ticket. As I said previously, I believe the governor has earned the primary, and I really hope he gets it.
All right. Well, listen, we look forward to having you back. We hate to see you go to Albany, but if that's what happens, that's what happens. Jumaane Williams, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.